Part 4. The Channel Islands. When I arrived in England from Brussels, I found that my mother had bought a house in Devonshire in the sleepy little town of Totnes. The faithful old retainer had come with her and eventually stayed with the family for 30 years, until she was pensioned off and went back to Cornwall. I hated the new house. It seemed so small and cramped after our old home. But I would probably have hated any other new home, no matter what it was like. The old retainer felt just as I did about it, so, when my mother and sister were out, I used to go and talk to her, and we both said openly what we thought about it, and it wasn't flattering either to the house or to Totnes. However, I spent little time there. Every year we went to Switzerland for 3 to 6 months for the winter sports and stayed in, what was then, a little place called Arosa in Canton Grisons. Nothing of any interest happened during the next few years. My life was a round of meeting friends, going to dances and spending some of the winter months on the French Riviera. Then my mother's health began to fail and we had to find a warmer climate for her, somewhere where there was plenty of sun and where she could have a garden, which she loved. We chose the Channel Islands, and settled at St. Peter Port in Guernsey. Here I became interested in the study of bees. But soon I discovered there was insufficient food for them and decided to move my hives to Sark, where there was an abundance of wildflowers and especially wild thyme, which makes delicious honey. But my decision was made without consulting the Sarkites. Sark is the most beautiful of the Channel Islands, but also the most benighted. The inhabitants are steeped in strange superstitions and bees are one of their particular aversions. They regard them as devils and believe that an evil spirit lives in each hive which can drive out the bees to attack their prize cows. So, as soon as I landed with my hives, a meeting of the Parliament, the smallest in the world, was called in the boys' school, which also served as the Parliament House, and the question was debated whether my bees were to be allowed to remain. After much argument it was decided in favor of the bees, provided they were kept shut in the hives. I was warned I would be fined a franc, then about L-odd, for every bee found flying over anyone's property. A deputation of terribly nervous men came as near to the apiary as they dared and delivered the verdict. I replied that I would pay a franc to anyone who caught a bee on his property and brought it to me alive, but no one was ever brave enough to catch one and put in a claim. Apart from bees, the islanders have many other superstitions. Every year on the 21st of June, for instance, everyone must eat a crab, because on that day the sun enters the 4th sign of the zodiac, Cancer, the crab. In one corner of their tiny fields they plant a few broad beans to keep off the evil eye. The evil eye plays an important part in their lives, and many of the women are believed to possess it and are looked upon as black witches. These black witches are often consulted by people with a grudge against someone else. It is believed that with a mere look they can make a cow go dry or drop her calf. They are also credited with the power of causing children, particularly babies in cradles, to become alive with lice. The most extraordinary thing is that they often seem able to exercise the uncanny powers with which they are endowed in the minds of the islanders. There are also white witches whose work it is to overlook the black witches and counteract their evil machinations. As late as the year 1928 a case came before the court in Guernsey in which the defense pleaded witchcraft, a plea which received the serious consideration of the presiding judge. When the old seigneur of Sark was alive, he lived quite alone in the half-ruined seigneurie, a lovely old house, built entirely of the local granite. He was usually a charming old man to meet, but not always. Jealous of his feudal rights, he had been known to ride round the island at night with a gun, threatening to shoot anyone who had lights in his cottage after 9 o'clock. He had the last word in all the island affairs and could veto any of the decisions of the local parliament. That meant that he could shoot anyone, if he chose, and no one could touch him, provided he never left Sark. For, had the court found him guilty of murder and sentenced him to be hanged, he could have vetoed the verdict and walked out of the court a free man, an almost incredible state of affairs in the 20th century. Although I was on friendly terms with the seigneur, the antagonism of the islanders to my bees was hard to bear. What finally made me decide to leave Sark was a visit I received one night after dark from a strange man. A day or two before, as I was returning to my lodgings at dusk from my apiary, I found a little child crying by the side of the hedge. I guessed that she belonged to the village, but, as she only spoke the dialect, it was difficult to understand what she was saying. However, as I usually get on well with strange children, I had little difficulty in making friends with this one, and we were walking hand in hand to the village when we met a much worried father and mother setting out to look for the child who, much to my embarrassment, refused to leave me. Thereupon the mother accused me of putting a spell upon her with the intention of stealing her. But the father evidently took a different view, for it was he who paid me this nocturnal visit in gratitude for what I had done. After I had promised secrecy, he told me that some of the people in the parliament had approached him to help them to throw my beehives into the sea. They were going to wait for the full moon when bees don't sting, and then cover the hives with sacks, put them on a cart and throw them over the cliff. I didn't wish to lose my bees, so I decided to leave the island, but I would have liked to have seen the parliamentarians tackling my large hives. I am afraid that the full moon would not have saved them from a very unpleasant and extremely dangerous adventure, for the hives were made so that they could be taken to pieces and consisted of boxes, without tops or bottoms, piled on top of each other, and each full of bees. They would have fallen to pieces immediately they were picked up, if they were not properly roped together beforehand, and the infuriated bees would have attacked their attackers. As a large modern hive contains some 20,000 bees, it is doubtful whether the men would have survived the attempted removal of even one hive. Next day, I returned to Guernsey and 2 or 3 days later went across to the small island of Herm, which was leased by Sir Percival Perry, of the Ford Motor Company. Sir Percival gave me permission to bring my bees there and even sent his own launch to Sark to fetch them and me. So I returned to Sark, taking a Guernsey beekeeper with me to help rope the hives and do all the skilled work necessitated by the removal of hives full of bees under summer conditions, and we took them safely to Herm. Herm lies between Sark and Guernsey and was much in the news during the First World War. It was then leased to a German prince who, the islanders believed, had made it into a base for enemy submarines. He lived in a beautiful castle, built of the local granite, commanding a magnificent view of the English Channel. It could have been used as a vantage point for enemy spies, which added color to the rumor. The prince was then interned as an enemy alien, and later the little granite island, only 3/4 of a mile long and about 1/4 of a mile wide, was released to Sir Percival Perry, and it was he who allowed me to keep my hives in the castle grounds. After a short time I noticed that some of my hives housed much stronger colonies than others, and I soon discovered that those which did so well were always over a stream of underground water. I then made a minute divining survey of the apiary and put as many hives as possible over the underground streams. The results were invariably good. After this, I experimented with various animals and found that only cats had no objection to sleeping over a stream. Dogs will sleep out in the open on a wet winter's night rather than in a warm kennel that is over underground water. If a dog is bad-tempered and unreliable, it may be because he is chained over a stream, and he will probably recover quickly if his kennel is moved. Pigs, which are said to rank second in intelligence among domestic animals, prefer to take a newborn litter out into the cold, rather than allow them to stay over underground water. But it is human beings who suffer most from the ill effects. In every house in which I stay when I am divining, I test the rooms and especially the bedrooms for these streams of water. Many a time I have found a stream passing beneath a bed or, worse still, 2 streams crossing beneath it, and have surprised the owner by suggesting you get a bad pain in your right hip, or wherever it might be. It is not rheumatism, but is caused by your sleeping over running water. I have tested many so-called cancerous houses and have invariably found that the sufferer was sleeping or had a favorite chair or office desk over a crossing of streams, frequently carrying malicious earth currents. The water, in passing through certain earth deposits or mineralized areas, becomes contaminated and produces serious ill effects on human beings who sleep or sit over it for any length of time. The usual results are nerves, sleeplessness, rheumatism and arthritis, but, if the water is malicious, it may bring cancer. I have been able to effect extraordinary cures of the lesser ills by getting people to move their beds, or chairs or desks, even a few feet, so as to be off these injurious rays. Sometimes the move has made the victim feel worse at first, but, as a rule, he soon feels the benefit, even if he is not completely cured. Why bees and cats should benefit and most other forms of life suffer from underground streams is another of nature's mysteries. Quite apart from my interest in bees, I found life in the Channel Islands of absorbing interest. In Guernsey we bought an old 16th century house and had to pay the seigneur of the land a pollage tax, so many chickens a year, and a tax on every window in the house. Many of the old houses have small iron seats fixed to the chimneys outside, so that the witches can rest during their nocturnal flights instead of coming down the chimneys into the house to find one. Ghosts were plentiful, especially animal ghosts which haunted old houses and leafy lanes, and were usually the forerunners of disaster. We had one in our house. It was a black cat, which looked quite natural until one walked through it. The cat didn't seem to mind, but it gave a nasty turn to people who were not accustomed to intangible animals. End of Part 4.